It's about some stuff to kind of throw in if it's, because I can't just do it off the top of my head like you can. I've been reading this really good book called Darwin's Armada,
Yeah.
and it's basically about other people that were his group. You know, it wasn't just Darwin's efforts, obviously, that brought Darwinism, evolutionary thought, and natural selection to light. So other people who also were, he called them salted because they all took long
Oh, really?
passages.
Like Magellan and whatnot?
Well, there was more people right in his time and era. So it was Joseph Hooker,
Mm-hmm.
whose father was the kind of poor head of the Kew Gardens. And the Kew Gardens was, I mean, botany was supposed to be something for interested,
The leisure class.
yeah, leisure class kind of people, and even nothing really that scientific about it at the moment. But he took a journey, and he ended up all over the South. They all went to the South
Mm?
Isles, and he circumnavigated the world too, and he was in a lot of the places. He took Darwin. He was like, I don't know, 7 years younger than Darwin, but he took Darwin and the Voyage of the Beagle and all the stuff that Darwin did, and he tried to.
Oh, he did it after Darwin?
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
And then Thomas Huxley, the Bulldog.
Yeah.
But his life and.
Up a little so that when we look at each other,
Yeah.
we're better framed on the camera.
And then the last, of course, was Wallace and his trips, and so there's a book that talks about each of their trips and then puts them all together, how they worked
Yeah.
together, and the conferences, the committees they formed when they came back, and
Well, before them, there was Humboldt, too, that did the whole.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is he in the book as well?
no, it's just about those four, really.
Okay.
And they do talk about Humboldt, but they don't tell the story of Humboldt much. Yeah, and Humboldt was an inspiration for all of them, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I read I don't think it's really a biography of Humboldt, but it's about some of his discoveries and voyages and whatnot. But I guess he met Darwin, or Darwin met him, and it was kind of anticlimactic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like, oh, hi, nice to meet you. Well, hey, look at the time, you know.
Got a drink waiting for me at the other end of the bar.
Yeah. So Humboldt was a superstar,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
and
He did a whole trip, like by carriage and rail through
yeah, going to Russia, yeah.
The whole thing of Russia and what he was doing there, and this is epic suffering, everything.
All right, let me know when. Hello, everyone.
Hey,
Welcome to a whole new year of Science Sunday.
happy 2023.
Yeah, thanks. Same to you. Haven't seen you since last year. How you
it's
been?
It's all right. I've been good.
Yeah?
Good. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Well, I had a little bit of a bug over Christmas time. I actually came down with it on Christmas Eve, but I am essentially recovered. But my voice is still a little scratchy. So
Deeper than usual.
yeah, a little deeper than normal. Maybe I should talk about science like this, like
I'll
Barry
go
White.
back to-
Barry White talking about science. All right. So I apologize if my voice is a little scratchy, but it's nice to see you all, those of you who have joined us online. And I know that some of our typical audience here, Joanne and Phyllis, just recently had a bit of a health scare, and she's home now, but recovering, and so they couldn't make it today.
Oh, that's how.
So-
Hope she gets better fast.
Yeah.
This is Phyllis, huh?
Yeah, Phyllis.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
All right. Today, we thought we would talk about wonder and the relationship between wonder and science, but we've had to put that off until some later date, because we were going to have that conversation with Reverend Mandy and just for some other things going on here today, she was unavailable today. So we'll do that conversation later. So in a pinch, Mike and I decided that lacking any other prepared topics, what we would do is put together some of our favorite science news stories, or at least the ones we can remember, having gone through a whole year of exciting scientific discoveries and whatnot. So just kind of picked and choosed some of these. You may have your own view of what were some of the best science stories from the past year. If you do, feel free to comment on YouTube. You can type into the chat area, or if anybody in the audience has comments about the topics we chose or has some suggestions about things that they found fascinating or memorable, you can step up to the microphone and talk to us about that. So hopefully this will also be a kind of a conversation, at least a conversation between Mike and I, but you feel free to participate as you are able. I want to thank the church for allowing us to be here, and not just allowing us, but actually giving us support, logistical support with the AV, support with a place to meet and a place to talk about the things we love to people who share our interests. And this has been many years we've been doing Science Sunday. I do encourage you, if you feel safe and comfortable, I do encourage you to come and show up in person at future Science Sundays if you're able. It really provides a lot of emotional support and invigorates our discussion to see people in the audience. So Mike and I both encourage you to come out, brave the cold, and say hi to us and join us for Science Sunday if you feel comfortable doing so. I think that's it. Mike, did you have any other announcements or thoughts before we dive in?
No, I think that's fine.
Okay.
I want to get into this fun stuff.
All right. Let's talk about some science from 2022. All right. Let's see. Off, on. This should be on.
You didn't test the...
I didn't test the clicker beforehand. I don't know.
Dave, can you advance it up there? Let me see.
And it looks like the slides are really small in the inset on the video. We'll work through these technical issues. And I have a couple of ideas about programs that we can do this coming winter and spring season for this year's Science Sunday. I want to give a talk about AI that's been in the news lately. In fact, I'm going to maybe talk about that briefly here today. I was also thinking, for a few years, I've been pondering this issue of the accuracy of scientific discoveries. And some of you will remember that in the past, I've thought about the sort of the asymptotic approach of science to a perfect description of reality, right? Or of our scientific models. It looks like it's working now. So I think I want to elaborate a little bit on that topic at some point this season as well. All right, looks like the clicker is working, and the slide still needs to show up on the YouTube feed there, Dave?
Yeah. It ought to be there soon.
Yeah, it'll be there soon.
There it comes.
All right. So, some stories. Well, those of you who joined us in December when I talked about cosmic ornaments, so this is the second year in a row I've talked about cosmic ornaments, and this year I talked about some of the astronomical ornamentation available to us through the actions and discoveries and operation of the Webb telescope. So, in my opinion, that is the number one science story from the past year, is the Webb telescope. It launched on Christmas Day of 2021. And we talked about it almost exactly a year later, and by that time, some amazing discoveries and preliminary discoveries and some beautiful pictures had come from the Webb telescope. So more to follow. There's just all kinds of science queued up for this beast. They're going to try to take some data about the oldest galaxies in the universe, the ones that are the furthest away in space and in time. There'll be some news about that. They're going to be looking at more exoplanets to try and get detail from the light reflected off of those planets or refracted through their atmospheres about the chemical composition of those atmospheres around exoplanets, all kinds of cool stuff. So I suspect that the Webb telescope will be in future science talks as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Just as an interesting aside, the size of those shields that are below, you might want to talk about the mechanism, the technology of it, but those shields are, I think, 5 layers of like a very dense nylon sheet that is about the size of a tennis court, when you think of it, that keeps the sunlight that would hit the Webb telescope just by the fact of it being out in space. It shields it from that and the heat layers that are there. We talked in the past about how cold it is on the inner side, on the telescope side of it all, and how it's protected, and the warmth that's there comes up to amazing amounts of heat energy get put into that, and those shields are very important in its structure that allows it to stay as cold as it can be.
yeah, it's like in the wintertime, right? You put on layers, or at least those who want to be better prepared for the winter weather going outside put on layers. And it works both ways. It keeps heat transfer from happening as efficiently when you have layers, so it keeps the heat in your body or close to your body. Well, in this case, these layers keep the heat of the sun on one side of this device and allow the other side to be cooler. So same kind of principle applied in a novel context. Who thought about putting blankets around a telescope, essentially? So.
And the whole bottom side are all the mechanisms for focusing it and doing all these different things, and all those have vibrations and heat and energy created by that, and this isolates it from that as well, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So pretty amazing. I'm sure we will talk about it again, probably more than once in the coming year and years. That wasn't the only thing that NASA did this year. They also had their DART mission. I don't know if you remember that or not. That's where they tested a mechanism to save the Earth from a killer asteroid. So that sounds pretty exciting to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was this there is a binary asteroid out there in space somewhere. I don't remember the details off the top of my head about where it's located. If it's in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, or if it's closer, a Trojan asteroid. I don't remember its location. But anyway, it was a binary asteroid, so it had this big potato-shaped rock and then this strange kind of oblong little satellite rock orbiting around it. Its gravity was and is minuscule, but it still has enough gravity that it can create a mutually gravitationally bound system. And so what they did, Dave, maybe you can zoom in on this part of the slide or just zoom in on the slide for us on YouTube. So what they did was they aimed a rocket and just used kinetic energy of a crash. A little probe or a little projectile was launched at the smaller satellite, and the goal was to hit it like a bullet and change its trajectory. And it worked. Fantastic success. So
It created some measurable amount of adjustment in that orbit of that smaller satellite, so they tested and proved the fact that we have the capability of hitting it, first of all.
right
From millions of miles
Right.
away, and then adjusting the orbit in a measurable amount so that we can see it. It's not that this one was in any danger of attacking.
Right, that's
it.
true.
This was just a trial. so
Yeah,
that
this was
later
not a
on-
killer
yeah,
asteroid.
Right.
Yeah,
Later on, they can get Bruce Willis and everything all ready and know
Yeah.
exactly what they need to do.
that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the last image here in this, the last frame I added into this picture. Let me blow it up a little bit. This is the last image taken by the projectile part of this mission. It was 1 second from impact on the smaller satellite. Dimorphos is the small one, and Didymos is the larger one. And this was 1 second before it impacted Dimorphos. And it was 1 second away and 4 miles distant. And that was that. So that was pretty cool.
Oh, so that's that little strip across here.
Yeah, just that
That's-
little strip across the top was the image from the last image from the projectile part. NASA.
There's a little face there going, ah!
Oh, yeah, little alien on the asteroid. Wait, we're Frit. Yep. All right. Another thing about NASA's pretty great year is the Artemis mission. This is the largest booster rocket on Earth and more capable than at least the current rockets produced by SpaceX. And this is the one that NASA envisions sending people back to the moon with. Their first astronauts that will go up, I believe, include a female astronaut. So first female to walk on the moon. And that's supposed to happen, I think, is it 2025?
I think so. They have one more mission that's going to go around it, I believe, also unmanned.
Yeah,
And I'm not even sure if the first mission is going to land on the moon or just go around.
that's a good point.
And I think that, they're testing out different aspects of it all.
Right. Yeah, and speaking of testing it out, there's some wonderful pictures. Talk about selfies. We mentioned that a moment ago. Here's the Artemis capsule that was launched out of the front end of the rocket, and it circled around the moon. And in this image, you can see the Artemis capsule, and you can also see in the distance a pale blue dot. That would be the Earth, and then a pale gray dot. That would be the moon. So one of the few pictures NASA has taken with various satellites and planetary probes, missions to other planets and whatnot, that has both the Earth and the moon in the same picture. Pretty awesome. And it's just a tiny little blue dot.
Yeah, that's compelling to me. I'm just trying to figure out the geometry of that, or the trigonometry of it. It seems like this Artemis thing is further away from either of those objects than each is from each other. And, but that wouldn't make sense. It would be in between the two.
Well, it is further away, and the moon being closer to the perspective of the camera in this Artemis capsule, the moon being closer looks larger in the frame, and the Earth is much more distant and looks smaller. But the moon is so close, relatively speaking, that it looks even bigger than the Earth in this picture.
Yeah, it's puzzling to me.
It's like holding a dime in one hand and a $50 in the other.
No, I understand that part of it, but I'm just wondering where you are if you're going from the Earth here to the moon. What are you doing over here, taking a picture of the?
Oh, it did a kind of a slingshot around the moon.
Yeah.
So.
It's past the moon at this point,
Yeah.
I guess, and looking back at them both.
Yep.
All right, that's more understandable.
All right, another topic. Remember, these are science shorts. I would have worn my shorts today, but it was a little too chilly. The warming world in 2022. So this shows average readings of global temperatures across both land and ocean in 2022. A little bit of a cold spot there in the South Pacific. I think that's La Nina as opposed to El Nino.
Which had a lot of impact on climate this year.
Right.
And on actions.
Right. And one of the things you'll notice is right smack over, especially Western Europe, it's bright red. And bright red in this graph means record warmest temperatures ever recorded by our instruments. So you can see there that in places like Pakistan, part of Afghanistan, up into China, most of Western Europe, several places in the ocean, much hotter than average, and in fact record heat. And you'll remember some of the stories about the devastating drought that has happened in Europe. The Po River, the Danube River, several rivers have nearly dried up and become unnavigable, and other smaller rivers have literally dried up and vanished.
Yeah, we were in Italy this fall, and there was a big concern as to what condition the rivers would be. They seemed to have come back by the time we were there in, I believe, late October. But I had seen that there was the drought in Europe. I think there was over 16,000 people, they're saying, actually died because of the drought in Europe. There was some terrible, and over $20 billion in costs.
Just because of the heat wave, huh?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I think they said that there were something like 29 or 29 climate-related things that all cost more than $1 billion in cost. A lot of those are things that tend to impact the industrialized world,
Right.
the advanced world more. So there's other things that don't have the impact.
But people tend to die more often. It's a macabre thing to consider, but in the developing world, the infrastructure tends to be less resilient, and the opportunities for people to move out of the way are less available. And so climate catastrophes tend to harm poor people and poorer nations more than the wealthy nations, maybe not in terms of dollars, but in terms of just the devastation and the loss of life and displacement.
And one organization that really looks at all these costs and evaluates them all is the insurance industry.
Right.
So they're very interested in costs because they're liable for repayments on those things. But in other ways, there's other organizations that look at it in other ways as well, too. For example, the biggest cost of all, and there were 29 over $1 billion, it cost over $1 billion. The biggest in cost was Hurricane Ian that hit Florida September 29th, and they're talking about $20 billion worth of damage from Hurricane Ian.
The largest source of insurance claims in history, if I remember right.
Right. But then really, if you talk about people, there was flooding in India, which we don't hear as much about, and that was 17th in cost.
Yeah.
Had 1,883 lives were lost in that. And, it was monsoon season, this whole long, terrible incidents of people starving and dying and disease and all things that come about with this flooding that went on in India that we haven't heard about too much.
Yeah, I've got a couple of slides that also emphasize some of that. This is a different picture of literally the hot spots in the summer of 2022. Again, we've talked about it, but it's just the extent of it and the severity of it is unprecedented in recorded history. Now, it's true that, climate scientists will tell us that you cannot create a one-to-one positive link between global climate change and individual weather events. But we have enough data, or they have enough data now over many, many years to show a clear correlation between the severity and frequency of extreme climate events, like a drought, and that is highly correlated with the warming of the Earth's atmosphere. So there is really no doubt anymore that global warming is causing what climate scientists have been telling us for 20 or 30 years, more frequent and more severe weather anomalies.
I think they say 8 of the 10 highest temperature years have been the last 8 years.
Yeah, it's amazing and distressing. So here's an image of devastating floods in Pakistan that put climate change and climate justice under the spotlight. So climate justice, a little bit of what I was saying before about people in poorer countries and people with lower incomes and less means to move and relocate and start over again. Those people their lives have been devastated.
33 million people in Pakistan were impacted by this, and that's like 1/10 of the population of the U.S.
Right.
Just phenomenal amounts of
Yeah.
destruction.
submerged 1/3 of the country of Pakistan. One of the reasons for the great flooding in Pakistan wasn't just the monsoon, but the relatively warmer temperatures also caused accelerated glacier melt. So that's another catastrophe in of itself, right? A lot of the rivers in the Indian subcontinent and in the Far East are driven by glacial melt from the Himalayas. Mm-hmm. And as those glaciers accelerate their melting, one can envision a time when there is too little water in the times of the year when it's not raining during the monsoon. One can imagine that during those times it's going to be really devastating to have water shortages as well. And that's happening in several parts of the world, including the Rockies out west and towards California and Colorado and whatnot.
Talking about the Great Salt Lake has a 5-year lifespan on it, they're thinking.
Yeah. I watched an amazing video on YouTube about what happened to the Aral Sea. It was about an hour and a half long video. I recommend, I don't have the URL handy, but if you do a search for Aral Sea catastrophe or something along those lines on YouTube, you'll see this documentary style program. And it started back in the 70s. The Soviet Union did a piece of geoengineering to reroute the water from a lot of the tributaries or a lot of the rivers that fed the Aral Sea. And the Aral Sea now is essentially gone. But in this documentary, they talked about how that has changed regional climatic patterns. The winds that blow over that region are now picking up toxic dust instead of picking up moisture. And it's having knock-on effects that were unintended and terrible consequences for the loss of that body of water. Fascinating and frightening.
Depressing.
Yeah, depressing. And, who knows what's going to happen when the Great Salt Lake disappears. Maybe there will be similar knock-on effects. That's really briny water with a lot. I don't think it was industrialized around there to the extent that the Aral Sea was in the Soviet era. But hopefully there won't be as many dangerous contaminants that are wafted into the air from the remnants of that lake.
Another thing tied in with that European drought was there was also measured, I think, the highest wind speed in Europe ever, 122 miles per hour this year, wind speed in Europe.
Was that a hot wind or was it during a storm?
I think it was obviously during a storm, but yeah, European windstorm.
Okay. So this is real. Climate change is becoming real. It's now, I don't really hear political discourse about climate change, which is both heartening in one regard, but disheartening in another. The regard with which it is heartening is I haven't heard much public dialogue about this.
Disputing it?
Yeah, disputing it. On the other hand, I just don't hear much dialogue about it outside of, people that are already concerned and talking about it.
Yeah, I think that some of the aspects of the last 2 years in power, the Democrats felt like they were doing some things that were working towards addressing it with some of their goals, but now that may be on hold again for a while, and there's other things happening, and the politics of it aren't beneficial to anybody really to sit there and.
Yeah, well, the budget for the federal government must be approved by the House. And so with the House now in control of Republicans, hopefully the fact that climate change dialogue and denial has, in my opinion, I haven't taken a survey about it or anything, but my opinion is it seems to be lessening. Hopefully even a Congress populated largely by a new party will continue to take it seriously.
Hopefully.
Speaking of droughts, here's the U.S. drought monitor. This is from July of this past summer. So extreme protracted drought is the dark red, just the blood red color there. And then moderate drought to severe drought in other places. So This is showing in Texas and Nevada and California, a lot of the western states. But there's also been some moderate drought in the southeast as well, and a little bit in Illinois and Indiana.
Panhandle of Alaska, too. Huh?
Yep. So this was July of 2022, worst drought in 1,200 years. We've all heard about what's happening in Lake Mead, I assume, with the lowering water levels. And here's a map from just a couple days ago. So the drought has really seemed to have worsened in the midsection of the country. And California and Nevada have seen some relief, and Utah. Texas also, some relief. But that relief comes as torrential rains, historic torrential rains in California. So again, the mantra that climate scientists have been saying for 30 years is events will be more frequent and more severe, including rainstorms. And there's just been the Pineapple Express, the atmospheric river of moisture coming to California. The good news is all of that moisture has improved the levels in Lake Mead. And the disappointing news is that Lake Mead has risen by 1 foot. The level of Lake Mead has come up by 1 foot. So,
It had gone down like 40 or 50 feet or
oh,
something
yeah,
like that?
yeah.
Or more.
Yeah. All right, talking about North America, I want to say a little bit about a ongoing crisis related to global climate change and global warming. This was a big story about a decade ago. The mountain pine beetle infestation has just devastated the boreal forests in Pacific I guess for them it would be the Southwest. For us, it's the Pacific Northwest area. And one of the repercussions of that is about 10 or 15 years ago, a huge number of trees were killed. And as these beetles moved north, and they moved north because the weather became more friendly to them. And
Not only that, but they could also reproduce and have 2 life cycles in 1 year. It used to be that the cold weather would kill off almost 95% of them, and they wouldn't survive through it if they got too far north. But now they could go further north, and they can also live and have a accelerated life cycle.
Wow.
So there's more
I didn't remember that, or I didn't know
munching
about
going on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
wow. So one of the knock-on effects of this is that I guess a lot of forestry companies in Canada rushed to harvest a lot of those dead trees before they rotted and became economically useless. And that led in some part to the skyrocketing lumber prices we've seen over the past 2 or 3 years. Certainly COVID and the social distancing and the slowdown of economic activity and transportation and global supply and whatnot, that also played a role. But they've harvested a lot of the trees that were killed 10 or 15 years ago, and now those trees are just rotting in place, the ones that are left. And it led partially to the increased lumber prices and the costs of building a new home. I want to read to you a little poem about the housing market. I know this might come as a surprise, a little poetry during Science Sunday, but let's see how this goes. The housing market, oh, how it swirls. Like a whirlpool, it constantly twirls. Prices going up and then down. It's hard to know which way to go in this town. One day a house is worth $1 million. The next it's worth $1 billion. It's a tricky game, this real estate. You never know when it's too late. But don't despair and don't be blue. There's a home out there for me and you. we'll find a place with a red front door and plant our roots forevermore. Isn't that a nice poem?
Yeah, a little bit of what, positivity here is good after a lot of climate.
Yeah. Do you associate that with any writer that you've heard in the past, maybe? Remind you of anything?
Sounds like E.E. Cummings.
Yeah?
Yeah.
E.E. Cummings? Yeah? Anybody? It's reminiscent of the writing of Dr. Seuss.
Okay.
Let me tell you where this poem comes from. This poem comes from an artificial intelligence system called ChatGPT. A friend of mine said, write some prose in the style of Dr. Seuss about the housing market. And this is what came out. ChatGPT. Some more about the beetle here. Sorry, I'm moving on. Moved on to my poem too quickly. Lumber prices skyrocket primarily due to COVID with help from a beetle. So just like I mentioned.
Like you said, yeah.
Yeah. So ChatGPT. So it's a semantic logic model of the English language where this artificial intelligence program goes out into the World Wide Web and looks for associations between concepts and words and builds essentially a knowledge base of the world and Dr. Seuss and the housing market and the fact that people like to have nice cozy houses and enjoy having red front doors and whatnot. All of these concepts are, and billions more concepts are squished into this artificial intelligence system. And I have, you can also, a free account on the system, and you can have a nice interactive session with it. I think I asked it to make a poem about a distant galaxy. You can ask it for facts, like you would Google, what's the mass of the sun, how long will the sun live, or whatever. You can ask it to write an essay about that dress that was, some people saw as red and some people saw as blue, yellow, whatever it was. Blue and gold, yeah, thank you. So you could just ask it to do these things. You could probably ask it to write a poem about that dress, etc. So there's a school district, I believe it was in New York, that has banned students from submitting papers because some teachers and educators are worried that it'll do the writing for you. And that's not the expected outcome of a literature and composition course. So they've banned it, but I don't know how you would know. You can just easily copy the text from the interface of this program and paste it into a Word document, and who knows where it comes from. It doesn't come
Voila,
with it.
you have a new Science Sunday topic.
Oh my goodness, we should try that. Wouldn't that be fun?
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that's clever. That's right. Write a 40-minute essay about Darwin's voyage to the moon. So that's one of the other problems with it.
Right.
Is that you can ask it to do absurd things, and it will dutifully give you a historic essay about Darwin's trip to the moon.
Does absurd things just by being asked. Is it named Scott Thompson?
Oh, I thought you were my friend. So that's pretty amazing, and it has repercussions for customer service and education and literature, and it just.
Well, not just that, but all artificial intelligence has
Right.
immense applications and implications.
Right. Yeah, that's just one of the astounding things that happen this
Potentially
year.
ethical and potentially not ethical.
Right.
Yeah.
So as I said, I'd like to learn more about it myself, and then after that, I'd like to give dedicate a whole Science Sunday to AI. I'm not sure it'll happen this year, but I'm really interested in it. One of the things that I'm particularly interested in, I have enough hubris or self-confidence to think that I don't need a lot of help with my writing, but I've always wished I could be an artist. It's one skill that I have mediocre gifts or develop mediocre talents with is drawing and whatnot. So now they have these artificial intelligence systems that can do artwork based upon something that you might ask. And this image won the, I think it was a prize at a Colorado, some art contest in Colorado for computer-generated imagery. And this painting, somebody sat down at a computer and said something like, show me women on an opera stage in front of a portal to a mountain city. Something like that, right? You just describe what you want to see in words, and it will give you an almost infinite variation. You can use the same sentence and hit go, and you get a slightly different take on the theme, and you hit go, and you hit go, and you just do an infinite number, not quite infinite because it deals with math and embeddings and whatnot, but billions of different pictures for any given sentence.
So there's a creative aspect to AI, but, you know, to me, whenever I think of AI, I almost think of it imposing algorithms and methods of evaluating
Yeah.
things, so it can tell you if your business is doing well or not. Bankers use it now to evaluate businesses. 'Cause,
Right.
you know, and then they can have biases in it that maybe you don't know about, or are they biases or are they truths?
Right.
They could decide not to rent very much to black people that want to start a business.
Right.
Because of the algorithm that's set up inside of the
Without
AI.
actually asking for your race, you know.
Right.
Right, when you submit your application, it would be illegal to ask what's your race or ethnicity. You can do that for the census, but you shouldn't be allowed to do that for financial applications and whatnot. But they can still figure it out based upon census data. What's your address? You know?
Right. Education, where you went to school and everything
Right.
else, right? Yeah.
So AI is, can be harmful that way, but there's also a really, a much older algorithm that's not nearly as sophisticated and awe-inspiring as this one, but there's an algorithm that looks for patterns in numbers. And they help, that helps the IRS and companies spot fraud by looking at the amount of money entered in different fields. If it comes from a real-life transaction, there's a certain pattern to the frequency of digits in a number. And if it's a human guess, we're not very good at knowing about reality. That's why we have science, and that's why it's taken hundreds of years for science to get us a better and better view of reality. But in any case, they've got these AI algorithms that can look at numbers you enter on your tax return and figure out with like a high probability whether you're fibbing or not.
I run a small 25-person shop, and now the big talk is the Internet of Things.
Yeah.
And in manufacturing, they can set up sensors on all your machines and sensors on your computers, and you can sense the activity, not only how well your spindle is running on a machine to see if it's time to change a bearing or something like that,
Right.
which could be very useful, but also it evaluates spindle runtime. So you can have 7 people running a similar machine, and then you can see who's being most effective,
Oh,
who's
really?
doing things properly.
Who's slacking off?
Right, yeah, so there's a lot of knowledge out there, and the way you apply it can give you some, maybe
Yeah.
somebody has an older machine by, you know, for whatever reason, or maybe he's more careful in what he does.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. What if there's a particular piece that he's milling or machining that is more intricate?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like our work is more artisanal in nature. If you're making tens of thousands of widgets, and you see that when Charlie's on the line, you know, it's working at 84% efficiency, but when Louise is running the line, it's at 92% efficiency. Maybe that's reasonable information, but
Right.
it's more to I think more in a production kind of environment.
Well, then we should have Louise working 24 hours a day,
Right.
obviously.
Yeah.
And that's a kind of ethical conundrum that comes out of some of these routines. You know, I've written my day job, doing computer-related stuff. I've written routines that I sell. I don't literally sell it, but I I advertise it to people in my organization and consumers of my product within the company I work for. I advertise it as AI algorithms because it's sexy and it, gets people excited about it. But it's just all plain SQL code, that you write
And
to
logic,
the database.
right?
Yeah, it's just logic. So I don't do fuzzy logic or machine learning or anything like that with the code that I've written. It just looks at millions and millions of pieces of data and tries to spot interesting things. So I do standard statistics like standard deviation and slope and the rate of change and whatnot, and picking apart all these statistics from this set of millions of data points. The result that comes out of my algorithm says, hey, something odd is happening here compared to everywhere else, right? And I promote that as a kind of AI routine, but it's not the kind of AI that leads to this kind of picture.
But they're implementing, I don't know if they're making decisions based on it, but they're implementing it in criminal justice
Oh, right.
decisions, right? Yeah, creditworthiness, like I said earlier, medical things, what potential
Expert
disease.
systems, yeah.
Yeah, expert systems that develop and decide what kind of tumor you might have or what the proper evaluation is. And all these things are artificially intelligence.
Yeah, they've
organized.
got medical diagnosis AI that will double check a physician. So I think that nobody wants to trust it without human intervention or human but it can, given a list of symptoms and readings about your vital statistics and blood chemistry and so forth and so on, it can make recommendations, and then the doctor has the ability to.
Well, the city of Phoenix has cars that are driving through artificial intelligence.
Oh,
That
right,
are
and the Tesla cars too, right?
taking people around places and so on, yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. So this particular kind of program, this art generation program, as I started to say, I always wished I could do better art, and I have through this program. So I asked for a picture of a laughing dwarf in the style of a Dungeons and Dragons character. I asked for a city on the edge of mountains that was filled with lava and evil, right? If you're running a story or you want to make up a story about something evil, here's an evil city. Here's a boy riding a dolphin. I don't know what's going on with its extra flippers and whatnot. That's one of the things that these programs are not yet perfectly adept at, is sometimes they get geometry wrong or anatomy wrong. If you look carefully, I think the boy riding the dolphin only has one arm, for example. This, however, is amazing. I asked for a ancient woman tending her garden. And I forget what my prompt was here. I think it was something, a combination of a cat and an evil spirit. or something.
Self-portrait?
Oh, yeah, that's what it was. That's actually, yeah, that's what it was.
What, was that, the woman, was that a painting that was made, or how are they, I mean, it's pixels on a screen, and is it finding a picture of that woman, would you say, or?
So each of these images, and this is what I want to talk more about during my upcoming AI talk, is the routine has scanned through millions and millions, literally, of images on the internet, and it creates a map associating different features in these pictures with a word. So a smile, a laugh, whiskers, a dwarf, small, a sweater, a garden, big eyes, fantasy art, art in the style of Rembrandt, right? Anytime a description is associated with a picture, this AI routine goes out and builds an abstract mathematical model of what those words refer to in the context of visual art. And so when you enter a prompt and you say, a ghost with large cat-like eyes or something, every time you regenerate that picture, you get a different variation on the theme because it's pulling in different aspects. So none of these pictures exist as a picture out in the world. They're all generated at the moment you ask them to be generated. These are unique in the world, and there's all kinds of discussions going on about whether they're copyrightable or whether the source pictures, the millions or perhaps billions of pictures that go into programming this model, what happens if they're copyrighted? There's all kinds of legal discussions going on about it.
We better move on to more science stuff, too. This is interesting,
Yeah,
but I just want to keep us
a couple
moving
more
ahead.
pictures.
Okay, a couple more. Wow.
These are off of my computer, so I've been having a lot of fun with this thing. All right,
Hey,
more science. Fusion energy, you've heard about the breakthrough with fusion energy recently, and it certainly is a breakthrough. They achieved a situation where the amount of energy emitted by nuclei that fuse together is greater than the amount of energy in the laser beams that the laser beams delivered to that parcel. I think it was a diamond capsule, full gold-plated diamond capsule full of isotopes of hydrogen, deuterium and tritium and whatnot. And when the laser beams hit that tiny sphere, they cause it a shock wave to go through it, and that shock wave slams together the nuclei of those atoms. And the strong nuclear force pulls them together suddenly and releases a lot of heat energy and gamma ray radiation and whatnot, X-rays. So you get more net energy as heat and radiation out of the pellet than the sum of the lasers that hit it. But that's still vastly far away from being able to capture that light and heat energy and turn it into usable electricity, for example. So even though they achieved ignition, where the energy out is greater than the energy in, figuring out a way to extract that energy in a usable way, and all the losses that must necessarily be entailed in that extraction of energy, we're nowhere close yet to having usable fusion energy power plants in the world. But we are closer than we've ever been, potentially.
the first successful time in which more energy was released than was imparted into
Right.
that pellet. I think I saw it was like 2.6 megajoules of energy went in and 3.6 megajoules came out. So that's a success, but it was something like 300 megajoules where they're just getting the whole system set up and
Yeah, the
evaluated
magnetic
and
containment field and the,
Right.
you know,
all the other things involved in it.
right. So it's certainly not a power plant. So this success is a success, but you should read it as a qualified success. And throughout my life, fusion energy has always been 30 years away. That was true when I was 20 years old, and here we are nearly 40 years later, and it's still not feasible as a power source. So now they're saying, well, this brings us to the point where maybe fusion energy is 30 years away. So more to follow. Did you have any more comments about that?
192 lasers focused in on that thing, or how
Yeah,
to put that energy into it.
lasers.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love
Freaking
lasers.
laser
I
beams.
studied lasers in college. I thought maybe that would be my career. Fascinating stuff. Not going to go into it right now. And then there was this thing, the Tonga explosion that happened 1 year ago today.
Yay.
Yep. So we're celebrating the 1 year anniversary of the largest volcanic explosion recorded by modern scientific incidents. Krakatoa was probably bigger than this, but happened in the
18,
1800s,
yeah.
1880s or something like that.
Yeah.
And we didn't, unfortunately, we didn't have any satellites or many of the other instruments we have today. And you can see these pressure waves coming out of this monster when it exploded. And here's a caldera it left on the seafloor. One of the points I want to make is that when this caldera, they think that it collapsed after the magma erupted out of it, and when the caldera collapsed, it allowed seawater to mix with the magma, and that steam that resulted from that is what largely drove this explosion. So there's a tremendous amount of water that this ejected into the upper atmosphere. And they say one of the short-term consequences of this is the Earth will probably, the atmosphere will be heated a little. Now, I don't know. This is complete and utter speculation on my part, and I don't have the scientific credentials to answer the question on my own, or the instrumentation or whatnot. But I wonder if the fact that we're having a warmer winter this year is somehow not just correlated with, but in some sense caused by the global warming blip. This is not going to be persistent. The water will eventually come out of the stratosphere.
Some they say could take decades. It's not just in our atmosphere, it's up into the stratosphere.
Yeah, right.
60 miles high, I think the water was detected. And I saw it injected 150 million tons, and I think that's British tons from the thing I was reading.
Right. Okay.
Into the stratosphere.
What's the difference between a British and an American ton, Mike?
The spelling is the one thing I know.
Oh, the E,
but
yeah.
Tonnes.
I think one's that measured in kilograms, and when the others measured 2,000 pounds
Right,
versus
yeah.
2,000 kilograms.
Yeah, I think they're fairly close. But the amount of the water in the stratosphere was increased by 10%, just based
Yeah,
on that
significant.
explosion. This was an underwater explosion, which I think you alluded to, but that just threw up all this water and lava and slurry and everything
Mm-hmm.
else. And it's very damaging to the ozone layer, is the other thing about it, too, that is going to have some impacts.
So one of the other things I read about this is it kind of caught scientists, volcanologists by surprise. So they are collectively having talks amongst themselves about doing a better job of monitoring the part of the rim of fire that goes through the Pacific and out around Japan and down into Cascadia in the United States, Mount St. Helens, and it's all part of the same kind of plate tectonic movement. And scientists are now talking about increasing their capabilities to monitor some of these undersea volcanoes or potential volcanoes.
The waves were 50 feet high from the tsunami that was created from this.
Yeah.
Just phenomenal.
And the shock waves, you see the first blast there, you see a shock wave that races out ahead of it in the first few fractions of a second of the explosion. That shock wave was detected around the world. Here's a view from the International Space Station of the plume created by the volcano, extending up much higher than any other clouds visible across the surface of the Earth. And it caused some extreme winds and unusual electric currents above the stratosphere into something called the thermosphere, and up into the ionosphere. So it was a hammer blow to the atmosphere. And then this story really intrigued me. A group of paleontologists and others think they have pinpointed the season during which the dinosaur extinction happened by looking at pollen and some sphericals of what looks to be ejecta debris, some tiny little sphericals embedded in the fossils of the gills of certain fishes and whatnot. They argue that these pieces of evidence combined indicate that the explosion that wiped out the dinosaurs, or was the nail in the coffin, as it were.
For most of them.
For most of them. Yeah, right, birds are still with us. But they think that Chicxulub crater and the impact was something that occurred in the spring. They found evidence of a giant tsunami that swept up into, was it Idaho or Nevada, or way up north in the United States? Now, there was an inland sea at the time,
Right.
very shallow, but still very impressive.
So this is 66 million years ago you're talking about?
Yeah.
In the spring, this spring?
Right, this
It'd
spring.
be 66 million.
66,455,227 years ago.
And they think that
I'm making
this,
that up, by the way.
and there was some talk about what actually caused it, and there's some new theories now that 3 of the largest craters left on the Earth, one in Russia, another one in the east, and this one, all show some, what do they call it? Carbonaceous chondrite, which is in 10% of the asteroids that are in the asteroid belt.
So relatively
between Mars and
rare,
Jupiter. Relatively rare. But they're suspected to be, or thought to be, in all the comets that are outside in the Oort belt, outside of the, or hovering around this edge of our solar system. And so the new speculation is that these are more than likely comets that came close, thrown off course by Jupiter, came in close to the sun, closer than usual, came around the far side of the sun, and on their way back out, there the Earth was in its path. The sun actually had such a tidal gravity to it that it split apart some of these and made heavier and lighter sides. It pulled the comet into odd shapes.
Broke it up.
Into parts, and then, so these things, if they were from where 100% are speculated to be this type of material, it's a good idea that this is where to look for some of these heavily damaging craters that came in and impacted the Earth.
Pretty amazing that something that happened 66 million years ago, we can do all kinds of forensic examination of the evidence it left behind to find out ever more about it.
Yeah.
The angle of impact, all kinds of things. I'm not necessarily going to go into today, but we might have a Science Sunday just about this event, world-changing event.
World-changing in some amazingly significant ways, because we're probably here talking about it.
Yeah.
Because it happened. I mean,
Right.
the dinosaurs were a very successful species for all these years, and nothing was seeming to bring them back or going to cause any problems in their life, but this terrible destruction of the part of the Earth caused them to die off and leave room for little mammals to come along and take over.
So talking about historic investigations of phenomena and finding ever more evidence of interesting things, you had a topic that you wanted to spearhead today.
Yeah, that was interesting. I don't know if Dave, you can pull up, I think it would be one of the last ones on mine. They've been looking at everyone's pretty enamored by the Lascaux caves in France, the cave paintings that were from so long ago, 30,000 years ago or so, 20 to 30,000 years ago. And a guy in England who's actually a furniture restorer.
Okay.
But he's also an independent researcher, and he gets involved and does a lot of things in this nature. And he's looked, and he took something like, there's not only these beautiful with perspective and showing musculature and so on, these animals in the Lascaux caves and all those caves around there. There's beyond that, and it's very tied in with, I think it's with religious purpose and a lot of different meaning to it. But they found, and it's hard to see on this one, this is the easiest one I could see, but just above that yellow splotch in the middle of the
Bison or
aurochs, chest there, just to the right, going up at an angle at about 15, 20 degrees, there's 4 little lines going across there, 4 little dashes.
Is that Morse code?
And this man's speculation, and then he got people from Cambridge to listen to him, which is a challenge in itself. He found these kinds of dots, and there's dots, and then also a lot of Y-shaped things just above it. You can see kind of some Y-shaped drawings up there. And with a lot of, and it's statistically significant, proved out, they found 606 examples with dots or lines in it, and 256 examples on all the different cave art that they have pictures of with a Y in it, so a Y kind of shape to it. And they never found more than 13 of these things in any of the groupings at all. And to him, 13 gives an idea of something that's important to people that would live 20,000 years ago or so. And 13 is the number of lunar months there are, right? And they would be on a lunar calendar. And so the speculation got to be that these lines and dots are showing maybe the months that these animals would be able to be hunted or would be in season.
Wow.
Would be available. Also, the fact that maybe the Ys seem to kind of imply maybe a female structure to it or whatever, and that might be when they're in birth, when they're birthing the new animals out, the breeding season. And so, so the speculation that then they ran it through numerous different types of tests to see if it's true, statistically, it's significant that this seems to be
So it does,
one possible explanation.
it's pretty highly correlated with their actual migration seasonality and
Birthing times and so on, yeah.
Wow.
So if that's true, and there's also a lot of other dots and lines and different things in there too, people that are a little bit leery of this say, well, there's 32 different types of markings on these
Graffiti,
things,
yeah.
and only 3 are what they're talking about that seem to fit in with what they're saying. So it's speculative yet.
But maybe those other markings meant something
Meant
else.
something else. And so what this basically is some indication that if any of this has any meaning, if all these lines and dots and Ys
Yeah.
and different things have meaning, it's an example that pushes back humans writing, proto-writing, back another 10,000 years further back than what scientists had ever thought
Yeah,
it. We
abstract-
think about it coming in Mesopotamia,
Right.
where people making, marks on clay tablets
5,000
and
years
things
ago
like
or
that.
so, yeah.
Yeah, maybe 10 or so, but yeah, this is pushing it back as far as we've already, doubled the length of what it had been until now. So it's a pretty interesting thing. There's obviously a lot of speculation as to whether it's true or not. They're beautiful, fantastic pictures, no matter
Yeah.
what, but then if they also are including human early writing, it's just a
Yeah.
phenomenal thing.
That is amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Mike. I was also intrigued by this, but I didn't read up on it as much as you have. Also, I want to say that regarding the meteorite strike in the spring, that conclusion has been called into question by some other researchers. So there's ongoing, pretty fierce debate about the methods and conclusions.
What, science doesn't know exactly
I
what
know,
happened?
always changing its mind. I know, you never trust science, so. All right, any questions, comments online, or anybody in our audience have anything to share?
It's kind of a whirlwind tour through 2022 science, huh?
Yeah, just a sampling of it.
Right, amazing things going on every day, and just, yeah, it's, once you start delving into it, it's just fascinating.
Yep. All right, thank you all for joining us. Not sure exactly when we're going to be back. There's some scheduling issues we're trying to work through with the church. We will be back, however, in February, at least once, plausibly twice.
Right.
And pay attention to the meetup group for the Prairie State Humanists and the church newsletter, or contact me or Mike for further information.
Great.
Thank you all. Take care. Bye-bye.